and begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm hosting this event today, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, SensiLab is an art and technology research lab based at Monash University in Australia. We host these forums regularly as a showcase for creators and researchers who are exploring the undiscovered creative opportunities of technology. So today we are really excited to be hearing from Professor Kat Hope. Welcome, Kat. Kat is a composer, a performer, a songwriter, a noise artist and a researcher. And she is a professor in the School of Music at Monash University. Kat is also the director of and performer in Decibel, a group focused on the nexus of electronic and acoustic instruments and animated score realizations. And today we're going to be hearing about some of that work, particularly Kat's research into animated notation, which is a dynamic digital form of music notation and a way of communicating musical ideas, where the contribution of performers plays a significant role in the way that the music is notated. And so we're really excited to hear more about the development of that research and also its development into the Decibel ScorePlayer iPad application. So thank you, Kat, so much for joining us today. And thank you everyone for joining us as audience and participant guests in the forum. We will have a Q&A at the end of this session. So if you would like to chat your questions to Kat as we're going along, feel free. And when we get to the end, if we're all willing to, we may kind of activate mics and you can kind of have a more open discussion. But we'll see how we go. I think it's as you go along, it might be a good idea to just pop your questions in the chat. All right, so I'm going to turn my mic off and welcome, Kat. Thank you very much. And please, it's over to you now.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks for having me in the forum and for making the acknowledgement of the country on my behalf. It's, I think, an important gesture. And yeah, I'm Kat, and I'm a professor of music up at Sir Zelman Khan School of Music at Monash, and I'm very lucky to be on study leave. And I'm going to take, I guess, a more artistic approach to my talk today. I'm writing a book about animated notation. But I think it might be interesting just to talk through how I came to it and the impact it's had on me as an artist, but also as a researcher. So this is my main area of music research, but it's kind of mixed up in a whole lot of other things like artistic research and musicology. I'm also interested in gender research and digital archiving and a few different things. So what I'm going to do now is just share my screen with you, and I've got a little PowerPoint, and then I'm going to connect to the iPad to show you a couple of things. Let's see if I can get to the start of my presentation somehow. Hang on, I'm going to stop that. I'm going to go in there, get it to the start. Right, sorry about that. You think we'd all be full-on experts by now, but here you go. Great. Okay, so just to start, to give a bit of a, I guess, a context to what I'll be talking about, is this attempt at defining animated notation. And I think animated notation as a form has got a really long history throughout music and tech, I guess, interactive technology, digital technology. But there's been a few of us trying to kind of, I guess, come to a definition that's useful when we're talking about it. And here I've got a couple of different attempts. Ryan Ross Smith calls it any score that contains perceptively dynamic characteristics that are essential to the symbolic representation of compositional idea. And I think it's interesting there that the word digital or computer is missing. Christian Fischer calls animated notation a series of abstract graphics that avoids symbols with inherent meaning and are put into motion for music notational purposes and manifest as fixed media. Lindsay and I also had a go. You'll see there was a couple of other descriptors there. So let's look at animation as a kind of a dynamic form of music notation that's rooted in graphic notation that's not traditional music notation. and is native to screen media. So there are animated notations that are not native to the screen, but in my definition, that's what I'm going to be using. The other thing that I think is interesting to think about is, what is music notation to music? Like, what does it mean and represent? Why do musicians continue to read it? Especially when it's quite poor for certain types of music, electronic music, for example, and improvisation aren't served well by traditional notation. So here's like 5 parameters. I often use this in my teaching of composition, but I think they're really useful when we're thinking about the different ways of kind of categorizing things that music notation attempts to explain. And Schoenberg and later John Cage came up with these 5 kind of areas of music that notation serves. And on the left of this little list here is Schoenberg's, and then Cage modified them to make them inclusive of electronics. So structure, timbre, so color, pitch, dynamics and rhythm, which Cage thinks of morphology, so structure being something that can morph rather than be blocked. Overtone structure is more kind of technical term relating to the frequency table, which of course is a kind of dispersion of pitch or frequency, amplitude and duration. And notation can be descriptive, so it can describe something that has happened already. It can be instructive, which is describing something, for example, for performers, but it can also be interactive, which is a little bit of a combination of those 2 things, and can also sit quite on its own. And I think that most of my music really sits in that instructive category. There's a little bit of interaction, but I'll talk through some of those things in a minute. Most of my work has been enabled through this group. I think Louise, you're here. So Louise and Aaron, these 2 people here work at Monash with me. And the reason they're important is because before, when I assembled this group about 10 years ago, I was drawing music. I wasn't really a composer as such. I was improvising a lot, and I was making music drawings, what I'd call drawings, and I couldn't really work out how to realize them with acoustic instruments. I was really interested in the relationship between acoustic and electronic sound from a timbral perspective. And then when this group got together, we kind of worked together to realize these scores, and we went through a range of processes. And so I always like to credit Decibel's contribution to my own private practice, because it was through the ideas and I guess you could say prototyping of some of the software that I'm going to show you today came about through suggestions of this group. And, you know, some of them are programmers, some of them are performers, some of them are composers, and this kind of combination was actually quite good, and I think a real testament to the effectiveness of artistic research in developing new technologies and creative outputs. And this one here, this is just a classic early score of mine, so that's the score there. So there's nothing animated about that, right? And I would say that all of my scores, most of my scores fit into this category where I conceive of them as fixed page things, so you can print them up on a page. But to read them as a group, you need to put them in motion, and that's when they become animated. And this piece in the cut is from 2009, which is the year Decibel started, and was the first piece that we sort of tried to get happening. And it's a very clumsy, pretty ugly looking score. It was made in Word by joining different pages together. Shocking, I know, to some of the people in this group. You know, we actually kind of joined the pages together, made a PDF, and we made a Max program that basically just made that image go past a vertical line like this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you some of these scores synchronized with live recordings. So just so you know, these are scores, so most of them don't have any sound in them, but I'm going to show you some that do as part of the score. But I've just synchronized it with a live performance just to help kind of understand and track a little bit. But anyway, this is the kind of thing that these scores sound like. And I'm going to talk over the top here just to give you explain some basic premises. So in this version, at this stage, I would just give every instrument a different color. The line is make a sound, and the scores are proportional. So if you're red, that means you should always be playing the highest note. And so that, you know, the vertical axis of the page is pitch and the horizontal axis is time. and every musician plays where their part hits the line. It's a very simple premise, but it was incredibly liberating for me. And most of my music deals with kind of very particular parameters. So I'm really interested in drone and long form, long durational sounds. Interested in glissandi, you can see here. I'm interested in aleatoric processes and giving over quite a lot of freedom to performers, especially when it comes around to pitch. But I like the certain aspects of my scores that I'm really, I control quite strongly, and other things that I give away. And I guess that's the difference between different notations, what they service. If you want to write a piece that uses traditional harmony and subdivided rhythms, perhaps this type of graphic notation isn't for you. But if you're interested in trying to notate for electronics or giving performers more choice or writing kind of long form things, I think it works well. But anyway, it just gives you an idea of how that system works. And then I made quite a few pieces like this with this Max prototype. And here you can see I've changed the style of notation slightly, and that I've given a reference note to each performer. So what I've got at the top there is the entire score as a printed thing, and what the performers see here synchronized with the recording. And this is a piece which requires, it's part of my ongoing investigation into notating for electronics, electronic performers, and using electronic artists as musicians in a chamber music ensemble. And what happens here is that it's a string quartet piece, and each quartet member is sampled by the electronic artist at a certain point in time. And that sample is, it's kind of like a granule is taken and transposed between the frequency range in this box, and then shaped in this way. So I might drop in somewhere else. This isn't very well synchronized, this one, if I remember right. The other thing I'm really interested in is low frequency. So quite a lot of the sounds, and I recommend you put on headphones if you're listening, because probably the only way you're going to be able to hear some of the low tones. Oh yeah, I think you might just be able to hear that. So as you can see, it's a very simple thing and very kind of rigid and organized. But for the kind of musical ideas that I had, and I was drawing these things on big pieces of paper, it was a really great tool. And I started using Illustrator to draw the scores instead of Word and Photoshop and so on. And then things became much better. And this prototyping led us to developing a software application that got rid of a lot of the problems that we were having with Max, which was networking multiple laptop computers. Max, I'm not a huge fan. Networking plugins that we had to use, like Max Hole. And if Aaron's here, he could tell you some stories about that. And so the group together developed an iPad app, which was programmed by Aaron Wyatt. And this was developed in about 2012 and still going, and it's on the App Store. It's a very simple thing, and it's really great it's a good way to network these scores so that multiple artists can read them using pre-existing local area networks or even over the internet. And so I'm just going to just jump to the iPad now and show you what the scores look like on there. So here it is. So the app is just, it just basically stores a whole bunch of your scores in there. It comes with 4 scores, 2 from ensemble members. One of them is a new one in there at the moment, which is used by the education department. So it's, when you buy it on the App Store, and it comes with a couple of scores, but you can put your own scores in there too, using a free desktop app that you can get from our website. And, we've worked pretty hard, I think, to keep it simple and accessible and small you know, in terms of download size, and modular, as Aaron would say, so that we can continue its development and refinement over time. And I'm just going to show you some of the things that it does. So I'll just choose one of my scores here. So these are all scores that I've put in. This is a piece called Pure for String Orchestra. That's the low frequency tones written in down the bottom. One of the great things about digital scores is that you can embed audio in the score, making what Simon Anderson calls a super score, which is, you know, you've got the materials for musicians to read, but you also have a fixed media part of playback. And what's great about this is it means you can retrofit a lot of pieces that were made for example, instrument and tape, put them together and make much more accurate performances of this. And it's something we've been working with a little bit. And you can see here, same kind of technique as in that cruel and unusual piece. But what's great about the ScorePlayer is that you can kind of operate it all from here. You can change, you can kind of make it projectable if you want. You can do things like change the speed of the score, for example, if you wanted to go to rehearse it slower or quicker or whatever. You can network with other, you can see who else is connected to your network here. And you can also use a manual connection to connect over the internet using an IP address. And there's an instructions file, which is really important for a lot of graphic notation, in that you need to, you know, to kind of get a language around what's happening there. Here's another one, another one of my pieces. And this, one, again, uses the kind of grey line reference point to remind the performers what note they started on. And there's a theremin part, that yellow thing there. But one of the recent things we've been able to do is to make a annotation layer, which means that performers can write notes on it. And that was just something that came out of all the testing we were doing with performers within our group. But also you can have parts. So if you want to just show one part, which is really good in complex scores where there's lots of different parts, you can do that, or you can have them all together. So that just gives you, I guess, a bit of an idea about the benefits of the ScorePlayer. We've also made a whole bunch of different paradigms for scores. So this one we call the talking board paradigm. This is a piece by Leah Barclay, where each instrumentalist has a circle, and that circle, you know, you play what's inside the circle, and the circles have certain behaviours where program into them, where they swarm together and get bigger and smaller and move off the page and so on. And you know, you've got some options here about how, you know, if it's just a solo piece, you can just have one circle or a maximum of 6. It's one other type of score. The other thing we've done is worked with artists to animate their scores to different degrees. And sometimes that doesn't actually involve animation as such. So, I mean, you could say that moving images, like shuffling them through, is a type of animation. This is a piece by Marco Fusinato that we developed with him using his drawings, the Mass Black Implosion series around Cornelius Cardew. It's a very simple idea that we developed. So we kind of took the images and attempted to play them like with the intent of the drawings. It's quite a long story, but suffice to say, there's a countdown there on the right, and when it gets to 0, that's when we play. And so we sort of play that central point that he uses these drawings. If you're familiar with the Cornelius Cardew treatise work, this is a piece of art that Marco Fusinato made where he draws over the score, and he's done it with quite a lot of different scores. So it was a kind of an interesting project, but this kind of card shuffling countdown method has been really useful for quite a few works, and I'm going to talk about a couple of those in a minute. I'm just going to take you back, hopefully a little bit more easily, to my PowerPoint. Yes, I did it. So I started developing, you know, I guess I've written something like 40 scores this way myself. And this piece here, you can see that my notation is starting to evolve. I've gone back to using 3 shades. It's a trio piece with electronics, so black, grey and dark grey for the 3 instruments. And this is another sampling piece like Cruel and Usual. So I'm really interested in creating scores that stand alone from their software. So any electronic musician should be able to come to this score in, I don't know, 50 years or something, and be able to make software to enable the processes that the score describes. In this piece, there are different moments in the work that are sampled, and these tones are kind of maintained through time. So you can see in the score up here, once it's sampled, the tones continue, and there's nothing really to play of these sounds. They're just kind of a descriptive element, so that the musicians can get an idea about where they're sitting in terms of the pitch organisation. So this is a live recording again with the score, and you can hear the first sample here. So it turns the pitch into a sine tone. I'm really interested in the colour of sine tones, but that's another research topic. So you can see that putting the score into motion just gives the performer a way to follow the graphic score in an organised fashion. So I'm really, I guess, kicking up against that idea that graphic notation is a free-for-all improv or improvisation, but there are elements in my work that are open. So whatever note that cellist plays, it's up to them what note they play, but they have to refer to it throughout the piece after that. And that's the other purpose of these tones, is that they help the performers kind of find their space. Another thing when it comes to notating electronics in an animated notation is I'm really interested in feedback. So I've done a few pieces where I've tried to notate room feedback. So like listening in the room and reproducing it and controlling it like you would an instrument or any other sound, distorting it, changing its color or its dynamic. And this score here is quite a simple piece for 3 sustaining instruments and room feedback, where you sample the room and then you just control it as a dynamic. I'll just play a little bit of that so you can see what I mean. So that grey shape is the feedback part. So these long tones are really annoying to notate on traditional notation. You've got to draw them as circles and connect them with lots of slur, connectors, and they don't really look like they sound. So I'm really interested in this idea of working with sounds, notating them so that they look a little bit more like how they sound to the musician. And in this one, it's a different approach again. I have these parameters, so highest note, lowest note, middle range, and that's a semitone. So it's really kind of supposed to be like a very small microtonal piece. And again, notating for electronics with animated notation, this is a piece called Caps Freed, which is a piano piece. Now, someone who's interested in glissandi and long form sounds, you'd think the piano would be the last place. And in fact, I was very late to write for piano. And this is a piece which looks at some of the early Percy Grainger free music notation, which has been a big inspiration for my own notation practice. He was drawing some kind of line drawings on graph paper, and none of those scores were really realised effectively in his lifetime, though he did make a kind of automatic page turner for the graph paper. I think a string orchestra played his theremin, a string quartet played his theremin piece, but I was really interested in how, now that these pieces are realisable in this using animated notation, I kind of made a piece which is a bit of a homage to Percy Grainger, with the aim of transforming the piano into one of the theremin pieces that he didn't hear. And this score, so the electronic parts are just very basic drawings I've taken from my visits to Albert Lake, which is the place where he also visited to get the inspiration for free music. But this is a 25-minute piece, so it's a very short excerpt of it. So this time I'm using the color, it's like an action notation. So the blue colors are the right hand and the red colors are the left hand, and each shade is a different finger. So when your color starts, you depress that finger on the key and you hold it there until the color stops. Again, it's proportional, so that like in the cut, the kind of trajectory of the pitch goes downward. And the sampled piano sine, the piano is sampled into a sine tone, and they're operated by the electronics operator according to the notation here. And there's very slight differences in width of the line dynamic. So I was really interested in Alvin Lucier's work with sine tones. There's an American composer that Decibel did a program of very early on. And he did a lot of pieces for instrument and sine tone where he would really look at beating effects. But I'm trying to go a little bit further and kind of examine the timbre of sine tones and the way that they change when they're put together with other instruments. And if you go on my website, you can watch all these scores there, usually synchronized in this way. So you can see this is a kind of film of the score play. You can see the controls down the bottom there. This is a piece I wrote for Louise, Tone Being, and it uses a system very similar to the one I showed you with the Marco Fusinato piece, and the score is up the top. So if you look at this from left to right, it only makes some sense. So you can see I've notated the embedded audio in the file here, the low frequency tones, and their descriptive signs. But these figures are not intended to be read left to right. And this really it was a really interesting challenge for me to create a score where the embedded audio has a linear trajectory, but the notations themselves were not animated, but they were to be interpreted freely and spatially. So the signs that are on the score, which is for tam-tam, which is a big round symbol, are drawn on. And so I kind of did this system of the shuffle card system in the ScorePlayer, but you can kind of see the low frequency tone if you looked at the tam-tam from left to right, but you're actually, for the performer, they use the whole area as the score. And just to give you a bit of I think it's a little sample here. You can see down the bottom, the black block going down. That's to help the performer realize how long they've got on that slide before it changes to the next one. And each color is a different type of beta or implement. And you can play all the shapes or some of them at whatever rate it is you want to do, but you use the tam-tam as the landscape which create the sound. And you might wonder why, as a kind of from a programming perspective, there's these two blocks, and it's because we've used this template for a few different apps, a few different pieces, sorry, where in this case we're just using a countdown bar, but we've also used this to display different dynamics in another piece. So I kind of really got interested in this concept of animation and time and the different ways of challenging our left to right understanding of music. And as a performer, I work with works by composers like Eliane Radigue, which I think Jonah Demers calls maximal musics, where you've got a lot of things happening, but they're often very small and over a very long duration. And it kind of challenges your idea of musical time. And this piece in particular was an interesting experiment in negotiating the unfolding of sounds through time, whilst presenting them as a kind of time-free score, I guess, if you like. So this is a piece for solo cello and subtone. So when I use these low frequency tones in my pieces, like in Tone Being just now, and this one here, where the tones are embedded in the score, I call them subtones. They're always below about, well, never higher than 100 hertz, usually down to about 30 or 25, and using a subwoofer speaker. And this is for solo cello and subwoofer, where the subwoofer, like with Tone Being, is close by. And this is a piece where I'm using this kind of notation really to describe what some people might think is not such musical outcomes. So these squiggly lines are actually scrunched up paper being rubbed on the cello. So again, a kind of action notation, but described linearly. Though, you know, I often discuss it with the performers, whether it's passing through the playhead in a certain real time, but they don't, you know, it's kind of, you can't rub the paper in 5 different places at once. So it's more like a gestural thing. So again, trying to challenge this idea of the left to right reading in some way. Let's see if I can drop in a bit where there's some paper. Here we go. So the cellist plays with 2 bows sometimes. So this was a piece in 3 movements. So I made quite a lot of pieces, and then I got rid of the reference pitch altogether. This one here, The End of Abasada, was a piece for a visual art exhibition that was also performed by different groups, including the Australian Bass Orchestra. And there's for any electronic instruments, so it's often performed by groups of synthesizers and laptop orchestras and things. And then I've done some work with more, you know, back to the programming thing again. This is a piece for disclavia and piano. So if you've got your volume turned up, you might want to turn it down again, because this is like the other end of my practice, which is the noisy bit. So you can see here, the score paradigm has changed again, and this is a spatial view of the piano. So the human pianist, you know, the left-hand side is the lower register and the top. So it's different to Caps Free, that one that was being read in a linear way. And the pedal indication is along the right. And, you know, you play the shapes, you know, you kind of make those shapes on your piano and fill them in, if you like. Whereas the other one, the disclavia, which is, you know, reads the graphic score using MIDI data. It was an experiment in Black MIDI, and just seeing how, you can tell I've got a very ambivalent relationship to the piano, seeing how loud and how many notes I could make the piano play in one time. It was an interesting experiment to understand the kind of different capacities of human pianists and machines, and yeah, and the idea of reading a score for a person and a computer, it was a really fulfilling project. And I've also experimented with animated notation and movement, so using notations for dancers. And this is a piece that is part of the Decibel 2 Minutes from Home project for cello and dancer, featuring Tristan Parr, who is the cellist on the Shadow of Mill performance. Again, you can see the low frequency tone here and the point of performance, but these red lines are choreography. And so the choreographer kind of reads the space as like the piano score, and they can interpret the lines as different body parts, or it's really up to them. And to finish, I just thought I'd show you my opera, which was definitely the most ambitious animated notation piece I've made to date, and pushed our the whole kind of relationship to the software to a new level, because, you know, making corrections in orchestral rehearsals isn't, you know, you can't just change your pencil, rub it out and write it down again. But we worked out in conjunction with Aaron, who was also the music director, we worked out a really kind of great way to make real-time changes to the score, well, real-time, very quick turnaround changes to the score, and delivering multiple parts to over 30 iPads off a server and so on. But this is the kind of the three acts, the overture and the interlude of the opera. And you can see in some ways probably lots of the things I've shown you already turn up in here, like the room feedback notation, and there's quite this kind of percussive notation that I use quite often. It's for 4 singers, a choir, and the bass orchestra. And it really, it was a great opportunity to work with performers and multiple, you know, large numbers of score players, and with, you know, it's probably the biggest ensemble we've done with the ScorePlayer. I just thought I might show you just a little bit of the opera. Maybe we'll jump in here. Can we jump in there? Maybe down here. Yeah. So this piano theremin again, some sampled instruments as sine tones, choir, percussion, brass. I'm just using this sample because there's quite a lot of stuff written in there to help you realize what's what. I guess it's a live recording from a rehearsal. So this again was a really, you know, it wasn't just making the composition, but actually working with the app and score delivery. So things like how does a digital copyist work, is something that Aaron and I published on as well. So the kind of digital notation, but also the movement of it, have been important things to kind of discover. And the most recent piece I've done is a piece in Ars Electronica, which was last weekend, a telematic piece, which is basically designed for latency and lag. And so I kind of built aspects into the score that would create already confusion about where you start and finish, and takes away the emphasis on those things. And there's a new element in the ScorePlayer which reads, when it talks to a max patch over OSC, and you can create what we call a canvas layer, so you can animate layers in the ScorePlayer. And this is just an example of one of those, which is taken from this bit up the back here. So there's some examples of my work, and a couple of other things. We've used the ScorePlayer as a basis for other projects. So we took all of the John Cage variations, which is a series of 8 pieces, which involve a whole lot of different processes, and we made a kind of app based on a lot of the characteristics of the ScorePlayer. And I don't know if any of you here are familiar with this piece. It's quite a famous, some of them are quite famous new media works, where they, multimedia kind of happening things, but some of them involve kind of measuring pieces and cutting them out and throwing them down and measuring them. When we put all that into a computer, we computed all that rather than doing it manually, and designed the score around the kind of notation that was being used at the time of the composition of the piece. So it had this kind of great historical aspect to the project as well. And we worked with the publishers of John Cage to release this as a version of the score, I guess. And what it provides is a much more accurate rendition of these pieces. And some of them are much more controlled than others, but you can use the score player in conjunction with John Cage's scores, or just on its own. You can play just one of the variations or all 8. It's really up to the performers. And we worked quite closely with the John Cage Trust around the development of this one. And this came out earlier this year. So to end, trying to avoid putting lots of text on my slides, a major fail here, but I just thought I'd put this here because I guess my claim is that animated notation has a couple of really significant advantages in that it's accessible to musicians from all different stylistic backgrounds, and it enables more participation from performers, whether they be with acoustic instruments or electronic artists. So, I think there's not that much scored material for laptop artists and other electronic, people who are kind of masterful at different software programs. I think there's a real yearning for scores that can be used for live performance environments. And so I guess I wanted to point out that common practice notation is not dead, but it'll continue to serve music wedded to predetermined harmonic and rhythmic structures. There'll always be music that needs no notation at all, and it'll continue to thrive and evolve as it embraces the new sonic possibilities brought to bear through technology. Animated notation leverages the contemporary digital technologies that are already a large part of our lives, making notation dynamic, accessible, and easy to share. Screen notations, including animated notations, can facilitate the inclusion of audio recordings into the score paradigm, creating a major shift in the way we read, understand, and remember music. With the revisioning of copyright, animated notation could enable music reading to thrive, enabling truly collaborative and participatory creative art making that can grow and develop with our times. So I guess staking a claim here about the potential. These are just my experiments in this field, and there's lots of others with the ScorePlayer within the group and internationally. But I guess I've had an experience with my own compositional practice through animated notation, and that making it dynamic and putting it into motion has enabled a whole load of different things to occur that have been really valuable to me. And, as a result, I've written probably 40 or 50 pieces in this format in the last 10 years. Well, so that's it from me. I wondered if anybody has any questions?
Thank you so much, Kat. That was amazing. I would like to invite, because we've got a fairly manageable group, I might just enable microphones. Your video won't show up, but I will kind of give everyone access to their mics. And if they want to, if you guys want to ask a question, please do, or you can still chat it to Kat in the chat window. So I might just do that. While I'm doing that, I just wanted to mention, Kat, the speechless and the John Cage variations was a bit hard to hear, so if anyone wants to hear those.
Yeah, I didn't have any sound on the John Cage one, but the speechless one, you can listen to that on my website if you like. But Susan, did you have a question? Got your hand up.
I mute myself. Okay. Yes. Well, thanks a lot for that talk. That was great. That was really interesting. I really thought Chunk was beautiful. What a beautiful score it is. It's lovely. And can you see that on your website, and also the dance piece? And is there a video of the dance piece as well?
No, well, the dance piece is only just being made now. I'm editing the video for that now, and that'll come out in a couple of months, I think, as part of the 2 minutes from home, like a 2-minute version of it. Right. But there's another piece for piano and dancer that's on my website. Oh God, I can't remember what the name of it is now. But they're all on my website, and all the materials for the different scores are on Figshare, connected through my website. So you can find them all on there. But yeah, Chunk is there. And If We Were Kin, I think it's the name of it, but I can send it to you.
Okay. I also have quite a few questions, but one in particular, like I have quite a few EA only pieces, and I'm wondering if they could be like, I'd like a program to turn them into whatever instrumental ensemble I have, and turn it into a score that works on your ScorePlayer. Is there any such thing?
Yeah, so it's called the Score Creator, and it's on our website. So if you
I mean, do I have to do it? Like, I can't get something to sort of analyze its structure and then kind of just draw something.
Well, all that ScorePlayer does is put images into motion, and you decide where to put the line. So whatever you might want to do before that, maybe the ScorePlayer is the place to read it or coordinate a reading of it. Lindsay's done quite a lot of that, where he's taken spectrograms and turned them into scores where you actually play them. It's like you're re-sonifying them.
Okay, all right. So in fact, if I did a spectrogram and then I had kind of like a really low level audio of the score in people's in their headphones, and then that would be kind of an inspiration for whatever they do.
Yeah, you can use it as we're doing an archival project with Decibel at the moment, where we're organising all the scores that we know that have been made in the ScorePlayer.
Right.
There's over 70. I think we've worked out there's like 180 that we've got in the ScorePlayer. We haven't played all of them, but between students and our own pieces, and we'll try and put them all together in a place where you can look at them, and I think that'll help give you inspiration perhaps about the kind of things you might want to try.
And what do you use to do the drawing? Do you use Acrobat?
Illustrator.
Illustrator, okay. Is that free?
Nope, it's one of the stinky Adobe.
Oh, right.
Programs.
All right, thanks.
No worries, thanks, Susan.
Hi, it's Joanne here. I was wondering if you thought about, because as I was listening and watching, I was wondering if you thought about how you could translate this into another type of sensory experience for people who maybe don't have, who can't hear, or have a vision impaired, that sort of thing, because it just made me think of that. It made me almost want to touch it as it.
Well, yeah, maybe we need some more 3D things then. I've thought about that a lot. My PhD was in infrasound, so I've kind of thought a lot about working with hearing impaired people with that. But no, I guess at the moment our focus has been, and mine as well, it's just been on representing, I guess enabling different types of performance. So looking at it perhaps more from a composer-performer perspective. And we've stopped. We sometimes show the scores in concerts, but we stopped doing that because people would just talk about the scores and not. So I guess it'll probably take us a while to recover from that experience. But, yeah, they're great.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Got a couple of questions in the chat window, Kat.
Oh yeah, so one from Natasha. So yeah, you can field real-time data into and out of the score. So we've used, like I mentioned before about the max patch with OSC. So that one with the circles, you can send the data out of the circle activity, and we've used that to drive spatial algorithms, for example. I'm not sure about going in though, the other way, which is something that would, definitely is possible in the future. But at the moment, I think most of it is sending scores out. Although, no, that's not true. We do send messages to the iPad as well. So we've used just very basic things like page turning. So when you're playing, someone else turns the pages for you, which is just, that already exists for common notation. But those things are possible, Natasha. And if you wanted to try a piece or something like that, you could work with Aaron around the ScorePlayer, because quite often what we do, we've got like a working version of the ScorePlayer, which is the one that we're all kind of like a sandbox before we put it up on the App Store. So as a postgrad, we could give you a copy of that, and you could try some different things on there. So Aaron quite often makes, much for his long-suffering relationship in the ensemble, he and the other members of the group often do bespoke score players that are in the app that we sell. Yeah, that's a long rambling answer to that question, but it's possible, yes. And the other one from Joseph. Yeah, so I use a spectral analysis. Well, I don't. I always get someone else to do the programming for me. I work a lot with Stuart James, who's the electronics and pianist person in Decibel. So it's basically a spectral analysis and remaking. So I think he samples, like a microsecond of piano time and turns it into sine tone based on a frequency reading. But I think you actually give me an idea. I haven't really ever published about that process. It would be a good thing to put on. But I can put you in contact with Stuart James, if you like, who could expand upon that process. I'm kind of interested in the relationship, as I said, between acoustic instruments and the sine tones. So I like turning instruments into sine tones and putting sine tones back into, against instruments. So I've tried a lot of different techniques of doing that, but usually it's live sampling with the microphone in the piano in real time. Yeah. Anyone else got a question?
There was one question about whether we could put traditional notation in there as well. That was a follow-up from Susan.
Yeah, you can. And so I can show you just quickly an example of that. It's not as effective because, as I was talking about the relationship of the score and time, I think we've done some experiments and we've come across some struggles, let's say. So this is a piece by Lindsay, one of the people in the group, called Silent Revolution. He has quite a different approach to his graphic notations to me. He puts a lot of information in the score that's not to be read, but is kind of what the piece is about. This is a very beautiful score by him. And here you can see there's rhythmic coordination. There's notation with, pitches. He's also done pieces where, I'm just trying to think of what one of them are. Takanova, maybe. I'm not sure if I've got that one here. Oh, yeah. Here's one of his. So this uses traditional notation, but in a slightly different way. Personally, I don't see the point, because I think traditional notation is actually really good at doing that, and there's only certain benefits. I think when you're combining it, like in this example, for example, this piece by Lindsay, for example, where you're mixing electronic sounds and things that are graphically notated, combining them. But one of the things we've learned, and Lindsay's done quite a lot of eye response tests, studying where people look on notations when they're reading them. But we find as an ensemble, you still need that human gesture to coordinate the start of the score, let alone rhythmic moments throughout it. And that was a really interesting finding because it's very precise. But then if you look at that line, I mean, do you play it at the left of that line or the right of that line? And we do hear and see at different speeds. So I find that kind of musicianship element of playing together and ensemble coordination is a really important part of the ensemble, even with this highly automated score process.
We've got a couple of people with their hands up. So I can see John has a question, and Callum, I think, has also got his hand up for a question. So John, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Hi, Kat. Thanks so much for a great talk. Just wanted to ask you a little bit about the kind of hierarchy that you've kind of got implicit in there, the composer-performer hierarchy. And I was just thinking about the way that the score is kind of animated in one way, but static in another. It's static in the sense that it can't dynamically change according to the conditions as they unfold. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, just have my sort of generative kind of mindset, thinking about or have you thought about how you might, or are you interested in using it in a more generative kind of way where the score is responsive? I'm thinking of the Cornelius Cardew piece from the Great Learning, paragraph 7, which is the sort of classic one, which is just purely instructions for the performers, and then they interpret it, and how they interpret it changes how the piece unfolds.
So I usually use text as a score when I want more kind of generative processes. There's a lot of animated notation that is generative using processing. A lot of that's made in that program, processing. Ryan Ross Smith makes a lot that are generated in real time. And who else does? There's a few people around. Oh, the Schlatter Collective in Iceland, they make a lot of generative ones. They also make a lot of video scores as well. But I've never really been that interested. I mean, in some ways, I'm quite old-fashioned as a composer in that I have these ideas, and then I want to put them out there and hear them played again and again in the same way. But at the same time, I leave a lot of openness. I'm really interested in the performer contributions. So there's aspects of the score that I leave up to the performer, but then there's other aspects that I control very tightly. But you're right. I mean, I don't give much control to the machine or the program really either. There's no kind of chance for that. It's all very strict. And that might be something to look at in the future. But for the time being, I think from my own perspective, as a composer, when I'm notating music, I kind of like to have a certain strict control over it. And I had a little slight comment in there about copyright reform because I really think that this type of notation puts a lot more emphasis on the contributions of the performer, and perhaps the single author model is no longer appropriate, but that's a huge adventure right there. But I just showed my own work as animated notation. There's a couple of really great animated notation websites, animatednotation.com. I think the other one's called animatednotation.blogspot.com, that have got lots of different examples, and a lot of that is generative.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, John.
Callum, I know you've chatted your question too. Did you want to ask verbally?
Yeah, I guess it's pretty clear from that question. I guess you did answer that indirectly in the last few points though. And as I wrote that, I sort of realized I mentioned this kind of fetishizing of the look of scores. I wasn't meaning to be sarcastic as well about the potential other sort of pole of that, where your scores do have this, there is an element of image based, but it's more about the kind of motivation behind it. I guess I'm just talking about like certain practices of new complexity where it's it seems like it's so wrapped up in basically how much detail you can fit into one bar. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering the kind of political sort of ramifications of dismantling a lot of these things that really grip you in as a performer as well. And
yeah, it's a great question, the political one, because I don't know if I've told you yet, John, but I didn't get my future fellowship, and I actually think that there is I've kind of noticed their notation is a very political thing, and it's got to do with preserving history. And I think there's an attitude out there amongst musicians and music teachers, and maybe some composers too, which is that, and this is just my, anecdotal observation and feeling, that they're worried about music reading dying out. And I'm not talking about music reading of traditional standard notation. And that's why I keep saying over and over again, it's really good at what it does, but it's not really good for a lot of contemporary practice. And I think the new complexity kind of pushed itself in that, pushed that boundary. And it's interesting because I was just talking to Aaron Cassidy, one of the classic, you'd know these trumpet pieces that he wrote, which were incredibly complex and, bespoke fingerings, every bar or whatever.
Yeah.
And
staves.
He's totally moving in my direction, And for years, that school looked at my scores and were like, yeah, these aren't even compositions really. And it's interesting to see how these things are converging, but yet they're converging over here, and traditional notation's like, no, because I think that it's going to replace it, but I don't think it ever will. And, I've always said that a rich culture has got space for all of these practices. No one wants to overtake anything. And there was a really, I don't know if any of you saw that article in Australia a couple of weeks ago, which was kind of implying that technology is making musicians dumb. It's just crazy. And it's a political stand about what music is more important, which one deserves to be in the conservatorium and have funds associated with it. And it's a little bit boring, but it's very much alive and well as a debate. Which I think is a shame because it's stifling new directions, I think. As for the fetishization of the aesthetic, I think that's a really good point. And I've spent a lot of time trying to understand my own compositional process. So some of my favorite pieces are the ugliest ones, without a doubt. And I've thought about what I can do to make them better, but actually I stand by my decisions. I mean, obviously when I choose what color, I have to choose color based on how different I can make them from each other. But, there's a definite aesthetic there, right? So I love Sol LeWitt and a lot of the abstract painters, and that kind of shows up, I guess. I think it's also my limits in Illustrator showing up. And then there's the, I manipulate lines and shapes to create sound results. And sometimes those manipulations are influenced by the way it looks, but it's definitely not the main driver. And sometimes I do pieces and I'm quite surprised at how different they look from others. I've really sometimes written things that are just one circle. I've just, I'm kind of interested in aleatoric and chance and almost fluxus-like manipulations as well. I've stopped showing scores in performances because everyone just talks about what they look like, and they also try to read it, and they realize they can read it, which is great, but it's like they've been led into that secret world of notation reading. But actually I still really I really want my music to be understood just as pieces of music and not as weirdly scored things. And I think that I've tried, one of the reasons I don't project them is for that reason. It doesn't really matter. That's just the method that works for me for making music. And I'm an improviser as well, so I don't notate everything that I do. But when I do notate music, it's for other people to play it, not me. And I kind of just found this kind of, I guess, method or series of approaches that I use over and over again to describe the sounds that I hear in my head. So I go through all those boring processes that composers talk about, hearing, imagining pieces, sounds, relationships, but I don't really imagine harmonies. So I don't put any weight in signaling those. So yeah, so there are a couple of really great questions there that we could talk about all day, especially the political one. And maybe I'm a little bit sensitive to the political one, but I think that it's a very complex. There's a lot of different voices in this field, and as John will tell you, just music has got so many different angles to it. Some seem to be preferred over others, but I'm really all for innovation and developing music, and developing music means developing notation. And I guess that's my political stand.
And that's probably a wonderful way for us to conclude, I think, on that sentiment. I'm cognizant of the fact that it's past 5 o'clock, so we might draw to a close. Thank you so much, Kat. That was absolutely fantastic.
No worries. If anyone wants to ask me any other questions, you can just email me at my Monash email, kat.hope@monash.edu. I'm happy to chat to anyone.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And as I said, the video will be available on the SensiLab website, the Kat's forum page on the SensiLab website after probably as of tomorrow. So thank you so much everyone for attending. We'll see you next time, and thank you so much, Kat, for presenting your work.
Thank you. Thanks for the great questions.
Bye bye, everyone.